I am Kishore.
Kishore.
Kishore, yes.
So yes, we have come with an environmental group from Australia, and I wanted to see India a little. And
What's the name of the group?
CERES. It's Community Environmental Research Education Centre.
Yes, I get it.
CERES.
Community and Environment Research and Education Centre.
Yes.
Yes.
And it is in a suburb of Melbourne, 8 kilometres from the city, and it used to be a rubbish dump, and the council
Rubbish dump.
maybe 25 years ago or more.
Yeah.
And then the council gifted the land to a community group, and from this it has had many chapters, but it has always had links and values around sustainability and community building.
How big is the area?
3 acres?
Yeah. 3 acres.
3 acres?
3 acres, not very
Least,
large.
Maybe, and then another couple of acres with a
I
market
think it'll be the
garden.
size of our colony, something like that.
Yeah.
That's what you have come through.
Yes.
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 Yeah.
Roughly, yeah.
Roughly, yes.
Okay, yeah. No, I just sort of, as a geographer, I like to get a sense of the place. And
Yeah.
so what have you been doing there
At CERES?
at this center, at this community, this place that you've described?
So for me, I live in the area, and I just go and buy organic groceries that are growing in my neighbourhood. So CERES grows them, and I buy them from there.
Is it a residential place? No.
It's an umbrella. It has many different enterprises under it. So there's an education centre, there's a cafe.
So the land 3 acre, the 3 acre or hectare? No. Hectare land is for this center.
Yes.
For this institution. So it's an institution.
It is run by a board.
Yes. Yeah.
And then there are businesses on it now, aren't there?
Yeah.
And there are businesses.
Yes.
They pay rent.
Yeah, they all contribute to the
bigger project.
And they contribute to the group projects, the businesses. So the cafe makes money, and some of that money goes into the infrastructure and
Interesting. Yes.
the
aims of the group.
market garden, a nursery, bicycle repair.
Alternative technology.
Yes.
People interested in alternative
Appropriate
technology.
technology. Yes.
They have things.
And then they run a lot of education. So most of the primary school children in Melbourne, they would go there on one day to visit and learn about sustainability. So most children in Melbourne know CERES. Yeah.
I get it broadly, yes.
The edge of it is a creek.
Yes.
On one end, it's a creek.
I see.
So there's a connection with the natural birds and the water as well.
What has happened to the dump part? What has happened to the waste that was put in there? And I don't know what kind of waste it was.
Covered over.
Leveled. Is it leveled or is it still?
They took a lot out. Most of the
They
rubbish
took it out,
was
yes,
it was like car bodies. It wasn't rotting material. It was
It
more
was
like metal
urban, domestic, industrial.
It was probably. It wasn't household waste. It was more like
not the domestic
junkyard.
part.
it wasn't rotting.
Industrial.
It was more a junkyard.
Before the site was a dump, it was a quarry. So it had been had been hollowed out for the dumping site. So now the junk was removed when they fixed up the site. Now that's where the farm is.
We have those problems around here now emerging.
Yeah.
because it is sorting out is a poorly understood thing, as even now in India generally, and even here. So anyway, everything is put in one place. But okay, then what would would be your interest in meeting me and us, and where can we contribute? Good to know, certainly good to know this effort, and I think we should learn from it, among other things. This permaculture, where does that come in?
That's the
That's
community,
a
the
different
series.
group?
No, the same. Van is also doing permaculture. Sarah also do permaculture.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I know some basics of it from the time of, I think, 80s or even earlier. Bill Moyerson.
Yes.
A big book of his.
Yes, very
Really?
big book. And did you know Venkat? When Bill Mawson came to India,
Yes, he came
taught
to India, but that was in the
Venkat.
south mostly.
Ah, okay.
I don't think he came here in this way. Probably we were not ready for that. But anyway, I don't know to what extent the permaculture idea as such. I know one person has gone to Hyderabad, Rita Dixit.
Rita.
She's gone there to get training in this for a whole month.
Yes.
She went there. Now she's come back, so let us see what is now. Now this workshop also that you people will be helping with.
So Ben and I went to Hyderabad to the International Permaculture Conference, so she must have been...
Was this with Deccan Development Society or what was the organization?
Aranya.
Aranya.
Do you know of Aranya?
I know of it, yes. Yes.
So Nasana and... what's his wife's name? Padma? Padma. Yeah. Nasana and Padma. They run Aranya. They organised it.
Okay, so what can I contribute? Your questions or
we heard that you know a lot about Gandhian philosophy.
Ah, acha. Is that the way I was introduced? One gets introduced in various ways. That's right.
How else would you introduce yourself?
Sorry?
How else would you introduce yourself so we can sort of understand?
I introduce myself.
Yeah, that's nothing here.
Well, let's say, living in my 9th decade.
Yeah.
It's a long story, and many identities, layers upon layers, and where you start, and now where you have arrived. The journey of 9 decades on that. So not easy to introduce myself, and ultimate. Really, do we know who we are really? That again, it's a question which in India is taken seriously. What are we? Our poets, our holy people have pondered over that question ultimately. The obvious answers are there. We are humans, of course, distinct from no, but my own self origins, of course, are in India, but that too in Punjab, which is no longer in India. You see, at once there is an affirmation and a negation. So why is it not in India? Because of 1947 partition. Our family, our ancestors were what is now Punjab, which is part of Pakistan, which is West Punjab. There was a division, in 1947 when British left. So there was this, it's a major event of the gravity and magnitude and tragedy of the Holocaust. I don't know how much of that is known in Australia, in Latin America, but it's comparable, not comparable to right now. That's very much now in the news. Israel-Palestine. It happened around the same time.
Oh, yes.
The creation of Israel as a state out of Palestine on that. So there's partition involved there. After that, many other things have happened. So similarly, in 1947, I think just before Israel, 48 probably, yeah. So in 47, this great partition took place in the west and in the east. So we come from there. Our roots are there. So in terms of in India, then in terms of roots, we would say we are Punjabis. We are from Punjab, therefore Punjabi. That is our root culture regionally. But with that comes in India other identities, caste identity. You can't avoid it. You are born into a religion and a caste. We are Hindus by our background, that, and upper caste Hindus, Brahmins. Our families, my wife too, her origins are also in Punjab. Yeah. So that's one part of the identity. I was 15 years old. My wife, she was born in Uganda, East Africa.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Now that's another story, you see. Yeah. That is her story.
It's all right, yeah.
So Kampala, the capital city of Uganda, etc. So after Punjab, then my family, my father and my brother, our family, we also moved to East Africa, Kenya. Our family had moved earlier, 1930s. We moved in 49 there. Well, my father had already gone and taken up a job in East Africa, Kenya. They were in Uganda, we were in Kenya. Now there I lived, worked for nearly 18 years in education. So my professional background is in education, teacher education, and the later, first secondary education, primary education, then teacher education. And then after that, during that period also, I went to England. I studied in England at 3 places, Hull University, Oxford University and Birmingham University. So I studied geography at Hull and geology, which gave me a whole understanding of Earth, some aspects of the universe, so forth. Later it sort of flowered into my interest in environment. Yeah. But geography is a very broad-based subject. There is physical geography and there is human geography. So you also have to study society, human and nature relationship. It has its own way of looking at it, that relationship, spatially, that is geography. But education was my professional training in Oxford and in Birmingham on that. And after that I came back and worked in teacher education in Kenya. But then so from India we had migrated to Kenya. But from Kenya another migration took place in our lives. We were married by them. This is 1968 I'm talking about. Now there is a history to it. There was again decolonization had happened in Kenya. 62, and there was this whole move to Africanize, indigenize the services and the administration there. So, well, that created a problem for people because it was a segregated society earlier, like South Africa. Kenya too had an apartheid, 3-layer, European, Asian, African. Now, I was working in African and later integrated education, but the whole atmosphere that developed led us to leave Kenya at that time. And from there we moved to United States, New York. Now, that was a move, of course, to a different place. But with that, there was also a change in the whole career direction, in my career direction. And that was from formal education, school, college, teacher education, etc., to very experimental, this was the time of 60s.
Yeah.
Some of you may remember. Now, that time in Europe and North America was a time of revolt, especially by young people and by students, for many reasons, for many counts, and in many ways on that. And many of these concerns and the movements that we talk about nowadays have their origins in the 60s. Environment movement, certainly, it got going after that wonderful classic by Rachel Carson, Silent Spring. Right now, California is burning. Fires, just fire.
Yes, yeah.
That's again, global warming, etc. But at that time, what she discovered was the loss of insect life because of pesticides. With that, the loss of birds, and therefore silence. I mean, you know that. So, the environment movement, the feminist movement there, the peace movement, very strong in U.S. at that time, anti-Vietnam War. And what other, you come from Colombia. I've had two spells in Mexico. South of Mexico, this Cuernavaca, you may have heard of it. And there was a center there called CEDOC. Have you heard of it? No.
I've been to Cuernavaca.
Much. Eh?
I lived in Cuernavaca for 1 month.
Oh, you lived in Cuernavaca for 1 month. Well, we lived there 2 spells of 3 months.
It's beautiful. It's spring.
It is beautiful. Did you go? Was CEDOC still functioning? No, you don't. You have no contact with that.
I don't know.
No, but its special character on that, and this is an aside from what we were doing in United States. Aside, but it was, related. The college I was working in, that is something which the Swaraj University is trying to now develop, education beyond institutions and schooling.
Indigenous movements? There's a lot of indigenous.
That is another one. You see, that our concern was it was part of it. You're thinking of the Chiapas, and that is still going on, and it's very strong. Yeah.
We have a women healer presidential candidate right now.
1 minute, yes. Hello. हाँ अनिल बोलो. बस ठीक है. हाँ.
So if you guys have any questions, you can also ask.
नहीं आज नहीं मेरे लिए थोड़ा ये मुश्किल हो गया है उस वक्त. हाँ. कोई नहीं, आपसे कभी मिलेंगे तो बात करेंगे.
He was giving us 1 hour.
Sorry. So, anyway, you see, as you said, but don't let me prolong it, because there are stories within stories. In one's life there are happenings, and then there are, it's like the stream meandering, going through. Anyway, narratives are like that. So there we were 3.5 years in United States working in this, of the Quakers, Friends, Society of Friends. So this was this college set up in New York State, on Long Island actually, by the Quakers, which had a very clear peace orientation. And peace, word peace, not just the neighborhood peace, not just in the the conflicts within the nation, but a global peace orientation. And it was located in New York because of the presence of United Nations. Because United Nations mandate is world peace. That is its primary mandate. They've got into other things, fine, that's fine. But the primary mandate is world peace on that. So the Quakers took that seriously, and for that, then they set up this college in which the word problems was the main curriculum. Can you imagine that? A college level, liberal arts, college level course, which is devoting on an interdisciplinary and cross-cultural manner study of the major world problems. And then what are the solutions that are emerging in different places to those? What are the places of resolving those problems? Example would be, again, you may be familiar, South Africa, when in the 90s the apartheid ended. So they were faced with the problem of what to do with the residue of and all the hostility and distance and separation that apartheid has left in South Africa. And atrocities also. I mean, there was no shortage of those. Colonialism, imperialism is that, injustices, all that. So they set up, the solution was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This was the far-sightedness of Nelson Mandela. Personally, and again, he got going, a whole process of this truth. It's well documented, and it's still going on that. So, accepting that everyone is there, we have to live together. The past injustices have to be undone, and where there were unacceptable, excessive injustice, the justice has to be done, etc. All that. But ultimately, oneness of South Africa, of all the communities, white, brown, black, there. So that has to be various tribes. So it was a curriculum based on those kind of problems and solutions on that. Environment was one of the problems, which was very much. So it was my interest. Education too was a problem. If the students are revolting, if there is student unrest, that is a problem on that. People are rejecting formal education. So what is the solution on that? So that was the kind of study, and I worked there for 3-4 years. But I always wanted to come back to India, to my roots. Again, I don't know what the urge is, where the seeds of your root identity are, and they are so strong that they pull you back on that. No, you have to achieve your destiny, your life's purpose back in that. But of course we couldn't go to Punjab. Pakistan. So there and this is a chance, I met not far from where your workshop is going to be, Fatehpura, two organizations, Vidya Bhavan and Seva Mandir. You can, when you go to Fateh Sagar for a walk in the evening, you can point out to them. And the founder of those organizations, Dr. Mohan Singh Mehta, in fact, the road is named after him, and a statue is there in one of the grounds of that organization. I just chanced to meet him, and just a few minutes on that. And all he said was, "Young man, there is work to do in India." That's all. Just one sentence, that's all. And we were just passing through a doorway, each other. Hardly a meeting. It was just that.
Did he know who you were?
He knew nothing. He just saw me. And he may have, some of the people, he had come to see the trustees and the vice president of our college. So they may have mentioned, I don't know. I don't know about that. But our face-to-face meeting, and I was impressed by him also, on that, and the tone of his seriousness. So it wasn't just a casual thing that he was saying. So I said, all right. Then I tried to find out more about what was happening here. He is from Udaipur. He was from Udaipur, on that. And a very old family from here still continue. His descendants still continue to live here and work in these organizations. So I came here and I saw the work of Seva Mandir. And then, because I wanted to come back, so we decided in 72 to come back. Yeah. I hope I am not going on too long about this. No, because it's not just a question of about myself, but it is more about, I think, finding lives. But again, I think I want to respond more to your questions. After coming here, now I won't go into the details of the responsibilities that I took over. But to me, the salient experience was going into the rural areas around here and meeting what in your country is called indigenous people. We don't use that term. We use the term tribal people or Adivasis here in India. We don't use the term indigenous. There is some legal problem with that because of the way it is defined and pursued in United Nations. So, it is at the government level. But to all intents and purposes, it is the indigenous people. People who are the original. I don't know how original anyone can be with all the worldwide migrations on that. But older than most of the other migrations that took place into the subcontinent. You see. So that is where I discovered one, let me start from a positive. No, not from, because, I start from, I discovered the whole crisis those people were going through. And what was the crisis? It was a famine, near famine conditions, drought. That. And they were surviving by cutting down the trees and forests around them. That. And even the roots, digging out, making coal. Now I'm talking of 70s. And bringing those head loads of fuel wood. There was no gas at that time. Electricity was there, but not for cooking, etc. And that comes much later. Gas comes much later. So fuel wood was the main domestic, as well as in some cases industrial use, you see, but mostly for domestic purposes on that. So they were the ones, the carriers of wood and hewers of water. So they were performing that role in this. They had been performing earlier also, but the scale on which they were performing in this crisis situation. And then I started looking around, what's going on? Why is it that situation has come about, this drought and famines? So I started inquiring, started looking into history, documents, etc. I discovered that this region, which is geographically called Aravali's, these are the mountain or hills chains. You can see them right from here and there. If you are taking a trip to the, I don't know,
Suraj?
Suraj.
We'll take them.
जाएंगे ना Suraj University. So you will go through the Aravalis on that. These are actually geologically they are part of the same landmass that Australia was part of. You see, a very ancient mountain chain, not like Himalayas. Himalayas are very young. This tertiary. These are pre-Cambrian. The very early, the first kind of, the rock formation that one finds on the planet. So these were very thickly forested areas. That's what I discovered on that. And they had only become deforested after 1950 on that valley, after independence. And they become deforested because they have been taken away from the communities and taken over by the State Forest Department. And the State Forest Department had a totally commercial approach on this, whether for extraction or for plantation, etc. at that time. And actually they didn't even have a plantation section for those 20 years on this. And the way they were exploited, the forests, was through contractors. It wasn't departmental work. And contractors, they will destroy more than they are allowed to. And in India, where law enforcement is weak, that corruption, etc., all that, we know that. It is everywhere, but the intensity of that varies on that. So that is what I discovered. And I tried to, with these people, I tried to help them, to educate them, to understand why they are in the crisis situation. And then what they are doing is they are destroying their own future. See, the ultimate destruction, say, you are causing it. But earlier, it was not your fault. Now, that is a story I'm sure you are familiar with. In many places, it has happened, etc. That it's a story even talked in relation to global warming, climate change, the differentiation, responsibility, and differentiated, for both destruction and therefore for restoration. You see all that. That is well understood. So I said, no, now you have to realize what is happening. So that is where I also discovered. Now with that, I just say that now that is the negative part. What I discovered, the destruction, the distress that they were going through. I mean, to the extent, in some families who couldn't feed their children. I was a case of a family who couldn't feed its children. And a father, he just hacked 4 of his children to death. You see, it may have been just a single incident, but it illustrates the depth to which that helplessness, suffering had reached, that people are led to that, I went to that. This was Morwal side के अंदर. This was I went to that place 70s की 80s की बात है.
कहाँ पहाड़ों में अरावली में?
हैं?
In Aravali only?
हाँ अरावली वही तो यहाँ से 40 किलोमीटर नहीं अगर भगोंदा साइड में झाड़ोल गोगुंदा साइड में. Anyway, so that with that the positive side was that I discovered that those people had a very rich culture, and they were, I would consider today what we urban culture, and even at that time they were more cultured, civilized than we are. If we define in terms of humanity, hospitality, mutual help, care for nature, if that is civilization, then they are more civilized than us. That is what, and with that too, that is also the root culture of India. All the other things grow out of that, the tribal culture. Now that's not the case in Australia. You see, in Australia or in Latin America, it is the European, British that's been, has been implanted, whatever, I don't know what term you use there. But here in India, our culture, caste and all, the caste was not there in the tribal culture. And it still is not part of the tribal culture. Untouchability, caste hierarchy, that. So now with the whole modernization, inequalities, etc., I mean that is the new story on that. But earlier it was that same, and it was that culture which Gandhiji understood intuitively on that. Although he belonged to a higher caste himself, he was educated. So he understood this link between rural India culture and the overall civilizational character of India. And then he juxtaposed that. I am going now to Gandhi. He juxtaposed that too with what he had seen in England during his education and living in South Africa for 21 years. Did you know that? Gandhi lived in South Africa. And that is where he understood this interface between Western culture and the Indian culture. Not so much African at that time. This, of course, in that it wasn't so much the cultural side as more the human rights within British Empire. That whole notion of everyone being equal as a British subject. I think you also, in Australia, you would have had that. And people, while you were a colony, people struggling on that basis to ensure their rights. So Gandhiji in South Africa was concerned about ensuring the rights of Indians in South Africa. He was not involved with the Africans, with the rights of Indians as British subjects. And it is around that his struggles began. But struggles with the non-violence and truth on that. So Gandhiji's formative approach starts in South Africa, not in India. Anyway, so I'm mentioning that because for me the experience of this exposure and working with the tribal communities Yeah, I think though you use the word community. Now the sense of community, do we understand that? The sense of common and community are interrelated. These are the opposite of selfish and private. Common is the opposite of selfish and private. And today selfish and the private is the dominant. And we don't realize how it keeps us in their grip on that. And reinforced constantly by media, etc. on that. So that sense of community and the sense of common. Community is the interhuman relationship, while common is the relationship with nature, the commons. If today humanity has to save itself, humanity has to evolve a very strong and clear sense of the global common. Does it have it? We can't say it has. No. How do we bring that about? Education. The sense of the common. And with that there is another thing also. Community, common. There is a sense of the sacred. In their relationship with nature and with each other. So what is this sacred? Do you have to believe in God to have this sense of sacred? Do you have to belong to a sect, a religion, to have this sense of sacred? What is this sense of sacred? They have it. All their life, traditionally, is lived with that sense of the sacred. That is uninviolable. That perceiving nature, the other, as having intrinsic value in its own right, whatever it is. And you may have to use it, you may have to, extract it, but you do it with a sense of sacred, which means you don't let, this is where your idea of permaculture comes in. You don't let it, you don't let the seed get destroyed because of that sense of the sacred. It's preserved in different ways, through rituals, other things, etc., reinforced in different ways. So that is where I discovered all this as the guiding principles of their culture. And that gave me then a purpose in life. I'm talking of 80s, in my fifth decade here, in this working with them. There are other parts and later things have happened. I am now more withdrawn, retired, more engaged in writing, reading, thinking on these matters, on this, and keeping in touch with people similarly thinking on through email. So that facility now we have. I just mentioned about family. My wife, she too, in the 80s, 70s, 80s, started an experiment for children's education in a very open, non-structured way, and ran it for 10 years as an open school, which she can talk about more if you feel like.
Is that to have some coffee or something? Yeah.
Something to, yes?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Lovely, thank you.
What you see, the choice is plain tea, coffee, or green tea. Green tea, है ना?
I think the coffee will be fine.
Yeah.
Coffee is fine.
अपना मदद करने पड़ेगा।
नहीं अब
नीचे करेंगे ना?
हाँ, नीचे करूँगी।
नहीं आ जाएंगे।
नहीं वो मैं बुला लूँगी।
इसने बहुत बार सुना हुआ है, तो
आ जाता।
मदद
नहीं मैं बुला लेती हूँ।
Could I ask a question?
Oh, sorry. Just let me. विशाल
हाँ जी
यार थोड़ा पानी का गिलास वो ये मेरा एक कप वहाँ कॉफ़ी का पड़ा हुआ है वो मुझे दे दो कोल्ड है पर आई डोंट माइंड सॉरी
कॉफी का कप ठंडा हो गया।
ठंडा हो गया ना
है कहीं ठंडा चलेगा
ठंडा चलेगा।
कोल्ड कॉफ़ी इज नॉट ए प्रॉब्लम Sebastian, the name of a saint.
Everybody's okay with the sugar, right?
Yeah.
You don't mind
Only
if,
one no sugar, right?
if you like
Sugar,
water
yeah.
straight away with that, or it's getting warm probably, no? It's sitting here.
It's
थोड़ा पानी पहले ला देना विशाल इनके लिए पानी थोड़ा भेज दे पानी ऊपर है उसमें जग में गिलास इसको कौन ले आए विशाल ले आएगा We used to be much better equipped for hospitality for groups when younger days. Now it has become a little. Anyway,
quieter.
sorry, you were going to ask something? Or?
I would be interested to know a little bit more about what model of education you turn to develop this open style. Are there some names that you particularly liked, their philosophies of education?
इनके पास तो पानी है
अच्छा you got water to drink yourselves?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
ठीक है
Yes.
Sorry, yes, you were saying.
Who were the educationalists that you turned to inform your own philosophy?
There are so many. That's why, right from my days of studying education, the texts we started with were John Dewey's Education and Democracy and Plato's Republic. These were the two starting points. Later on, then, I got more into educational psychology on that. And in that, I found Piaget's work quite interesting. The whole developmental, in various ways, psychology that he, evolutionary psychology, etc. And there are others, but there are more now critiques. Those in CEDOC in Mexico, Ivan Illich,
Yes. Yes.
the author of Deschooling Society. I think he is one of the most radical critics of systems, of education, of health, transportation. Ivan Illich. It's all of this is available on. And another one, since you asked the question, I have not sort of thought about it and not really. But one person, I think, through it all, and right from my, I think, college days, Martin Buber.
Yeah. I thou.
His I thou, that is his relational philosophy on that. I thou, I it. And, but he has written on education too. Education of character. There's a book with the title Between Man and Man. It's all his work is available online now.
Sure.
Yeah. And now I think we've got to now. I mean, this is what really last few days I've been pondering. We've got to bring together now the critiques of, I don't know to what extent the critiques of what is going on now, mainstream development, are seriously thought in groups like yours. And permaculture, you see, it is an alternative to what is called green revolution, chemical agriculture, etc. So there is a whole broad now expression of alternatives to mainstream development, even to industrialization, and therefore education and health on that. So with that, now we've got to integrate these critiques of development, of education, of economy, of politics, integrate them. So education cannot be thought, as a separate thing.
Yes.
It is. In fact, this is not it's strange. It's not a new concept. End of the 18th century, Hegel, of all people, Friedrich Hegel, the German philosopher. To him, education was one of the key processes in which human self-realization happens, individually and collectively. Self-realization of humanity. Just imagine. You asked me, how do I? It is that process. Hegel was conscious that. Of course, he was concerned about humanity's evolution and human thought's evolution at that stage, which he considered himself as the one who defines where. This was all in the European context, on that German European context of state as the ultimate expression. That is from where we first get. Then later on, Marx and others, they critiqued it. They developed their own versions of that, etc. But this education in that way, and for that, I don't think there is right now any integrated thinking, in my knowledge, about education, which brings together these critiques and then thinks about what is the alternative. Use that change of consciousness, that change of human mindset of that, about itself and about its relationship with nature, on that. Thinking beyond the institutions which are right now shaped by that earlier thinking. So alternatives. And permaculture is an example of that in that area of agriculture. This. And there are others. You mentioned appropriate technology. Small is beautiful. There are. All these were, Yes. Yes, that comes from 80s.
Yeah.
Yes. And designed by a space scientist. Yeah. This little simple. He was doing a space science, Indian Space Research Organization. Very brilliant. And we've taken care of it and kept it. Our lunch is being cooked there.
Oh, really? You have food in there now?
I'll show you where it has reached on this.
Amazing.
And we often, the lentils, rice, and they get cooked.
Well.
Sweet potatoes are in there. I have to now check it and see if hope they're not overdone. So that is what. So I think this is the thing which we have to address. And I can't suggest anyone. I think there are parts and bits and pieces of that. There are more critiques than solutions right now. This. And yes, there are experiments locally, partially, on particular aspects on this. Politically, I think the most interesting thing is what is happening in Bolivia and Peru and Chiapas on this.
Buen vivir, the rights of nature. No?
Yeah, the rights of nature. And that too, is it Eva Morales? Yeah. And that too coming from an indigenous background too, where, so all that I think needs to be, and what kind of education. Here I think the vernaculars have to play a very key role. The vernaculars.
This is for you, on sugar.
Thank you.
My pleasure. And
thank you.
You make someone a lovely wife.
Please, help us. Yes.
Okay. This is probably a pretty broad question, but
Sorry. Just. Why don't we just have a
yes.
sip of this? तुम अपने लिए भी लाए ना?
नहीं, मैं नहीं पीता.
नहीं पीते. अच्छा. Okay.
किशोर जी, मैं इनको आपके पास में छोड़ करके जा सकता हूँ. मुझको जाना होगा अभी.
तो
मगर नीचे ऑटो है इनका.
कब तक वो मेरे ऊपर निर्भर है.
हाँ, नहीं मतलब अभी लंच का टाइम भी हो जाएगा इनका 1:30 बजे तक.
1:30 बजे है ना, तो उसी हिसाब से हम
मतलब
अभी क्या
1 बज गया.
1:11.
तो
we have another, he tells me another 20 minutes, 15
is that okay with you guys?
Yeah.
Other guys are already reached at Shikshantar. So she just asked
the
me. Auto guy is down there. So I'll leave you guys now because I have to catch the flight.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, that's all right.
So
you've done the
the basics.
the hospitality.
So I'll just tell the auto guy. So he's just down here.
Oh, he's waiting.
Uh-huh.
Oh, cool.
So he'll talk to you there at Shikshantar.
Good.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you in Australia then.
Yeah.
Looking forward to seeing you in Australia.
Yeah.
So. Okay.
See you, Vishal. Thanks for everything.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'll see you in a few months.
Yes. ठीक है, आगे दीजिए मुझे.
One thing these Shikshantar Swaraj University people have learnt or recovered in themselves, this sense of love and care. They really. वो एक ईमेल भी आया है विकल्प संगम के बाद उसी के ऊपर, आप इसी चीज के ऊपर. और मैंने भी एक भेजा है, जो अपनापन आप बना लेते हो ना, जो भी आता है.
हाँ, वो बेहतर. सही है.
Feeling of just being.
We can also put this
कोई
things
नहीं
back.
रख दो. नहीं कोई नहीं रख दो.
Thank you. Ciao.
Ciao.
Safe travels.
हम अभी आगे जाएंगे. मुझे वहाँ जाना है.
इसको जाना है.
आप आ जाइए.
ले लो.
Yeah, let me get your question right.
तो ये लोग तो साथ
I understand the complexity of
जाएंगे.
all these interconnections between industrialization, economy,
एक और गाड़ी
politics.
है.
हाँ, 10 मिनट.
And I'm always thinking in my context. Yeah? So I don't know if you're aware, but we are like going through a transition in a peace process in Colombia.
सुखमनी.
I know, I followed some of the rebellions and the response to how they were dealt with. Yes. Yeah.
So that peace is, let's say, a political agreement between one group and the government. But beyond that, there's a lot of hatred, a lot of polarization, and violence after so many years of conflict on the war against drugs. It's embedded in our culture. So what kind of tools or advices do you think I can read a bit to see how can this culture of violence can be overcome?
Do you, in your country or elsewhere in Latin America or Australia, do you find the culture of non-violence surviving anywhere? No, think about it. Don't just, I think there's no straightaway answer, but you need to think. When we say a culture of violence, yes, you're right, there is. And it is manifest in the political domain, economic domain also. Capitalism is war of all against all. By, its intrinsic character is that, competition. And enhancement of your interest. And, accumulation, dispossession, all that's part of the system. That's well understood. But also then the violence socially. Now question is, social domain, that is family relationship, neighborhood relationships, community, and in our country even castes and subcastes, occupations, occupational groups, trade unions. Have they too also been caught up in the culture of violence, or does the culture of non-violence, mutual help, care, that we see in a family, does that still survive? You see, that's the question. And there too, now you have a lot of indigenous people in Colombia also on this. So I think anthropologists have done a lot of fiction and non-fiction writing. There's some great names about the indigenous people, fiction around the indigenous. Vargas, right?
Yeah, Vargas Llosa.
Yes. I've read those things.
Garcia Marquez
too. The way they bring out,
yes,
the cultures of those people. So I think any sort of alternative, revolutionary beginnings have to begin with those seeds of non-violence. Non-violence to other human beings and non-violence to nature. But first understand, you see, non-violence, before you go into culture, you have to understand it in yourself, your nature. Have you become by nature non-violent? You see, Gandhi's first effort was to make himself, and it started with his relationship with his wife. You read his autobiography.
I'm reading
that.
Right now.
You read his autobiography, the story of my experiments with truth. And he mentions an episode of near violence to his wife because of a principle. He wanted her, it was a house guest staying with them. And there were toilets. He had a toilet. So he wanted his wife to clean the toilet of the untouchable, the low caste. This is in South Africa. She refused. I would not. And then he came to the verge, not hitting or anything. He said, then you can go away. Gandhi. Yes. He describes it. It's a very confessional, story of mine. You should read this. You see, there are 2 or 3 books of Gandhi you should read. Really, I can suggest those. One is this story of my experiments with truth, autobiography.
Yeah.
And the other one is sort of his manifesto, Hind Swaraj, HIND SWARAJ, written again on board a ship traveling from London to Durban, to South Africa, or Cape Town, yes. And it is a manifesto in the form of a dialogue, dealing with the question of violence and non-violence for liberation, for self-realization, to be true to ourselves. You know, there is Gandhi's concept of God as truth. I don't know if you first you say truth is, later on he changed it to truth is God. So truth is what he was committed to. And the source of truth is yourself. So discover that in its totality, not in its narrow privacy, your truth. He called it, my small inner voice. Now, you see, Gandhi in that felt connected with the larger soul. In our scriptures, the two words which are used, one's own spiritual self is called Atma, A-T-M-A, my own spirit, the individual spirit, Atma. But there is a universal spirit that is called Param Atma. Param Atma. Param means abiding and all-pervasive spirit, which the word, the Great Spirit. Have you seen that quotation from Chief Seattle to George Washington about land taken? You know that, no? Yes. In that the word Great Spirit he uses. Chief Seattle uses that word. So you ask about, sources. These are stray and well thought out, all kinds of things, etc. This, if you want to more academically go into, just 1 minute, more into the great transformation, into the whole change that has taken place, then Karl Polanyi's book, Economist, The Great Transformation, how our economy became disembedded from our society, our social existence. Karl, K-A-R-L, Hungarian, P-O-L-A-N-Y-I, The Great Transformation, and these are classics on this. So he, goes into the whole analysis. This is a book from 40s. So he's talking about the post-depression period and all the disarray, the world wars of the 20th century. There's this post-Second World War, I think, or during that time, etc. Anyway, so these are classic, but there are thinkers who wrote about these issues, thought about those issues, and the whole string of them. You must have scholars and thinkers in your country also on this. Gustavo Esteva, does that name mean anything? He is
Arturo Escobar.
Hmm?
Arturo Escobar.
He's another one, Arturo Escobar. He's from Colombia? Yes. And Gustavo Esteva, I think, is Mexican. Yeah. There is now a website with the name Radical Ecological Democracy, where they are putting these writings, short pieces, of people like, recently there was one by David Barkin. I heard that Barkin, B-A-R-K-I-N. You look at that website and I think Radical Ecological Democracy. Now this is a term which Ashish Kothari, Kalpavriksha, I don't know if you've heard of that organization based in Pune. So, they are familiar. We just had a gathering of people working on alternatives, working and thinking on alternatives, not far from here, about 10 kilometers from here, a gathering of these people. And this was hosted by Shikshantar, your host, and by. I don't know if I have answered your question.
I think the answer that I got from this and something that I intuitively feel is that
I think you have a car, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
They're
we
waiting
there's
for lunch.
expressions
yes.
of
So
that
we need to leave
in
5
my
minutes.
place,
Yeah.
and those
Okay.
expressions
Yeah.
are the
You see, you have to
those I should look for. Yeah.
No, you see, again, there has to be this movement of self-discovery. So, I mean, and it can't be just in institutions and academic. It has to be with the people. I think this search has to be with the people, and with the people who have this surviving. I think in some ways, every family has this quality on this. But the cultivation of this alternative, and cultivation of this in yourself, in your own living on this. I think if you have a realization of it, then the actions also follow from that. I don't think you have to pre-plan actions. You are urged, you are moved into those actions. So first is the self-examination of this. And I think sometimes people get too caught up in, am I switching off the light or not? You have a darkness day in Australia, yes. That's all right. Those are symbolic actions. But I think in my living, personal, family, neighborhood, and beyond that, whoever community I am involved with on that, or the network that we are part of, how much this is brought into play on this. I found in my working with Quakers, I think they, in their own Christian, of course, but I think their practice of love, what they call recognition of God in every human being, I found that to a large degree. And on the basis of that, listening to everybody, arriving at a consensus, not coming to a decision until their meetings for worship are silent meetings of worship. There's no clergy. There's only a clerk who records what happens in the meeting. So there are meetings of worship, and there's no sermons, no preacher. What is moved, one is moved to say, that is the sermon in a meeting of worship, silent meeting of worship in a circle. This. So that is where I experienced, even in their business meetings, that there are certain principles, values which they have evolved, by which they live, even in their business, even in their industrial other activities, etc. I'm not suggesting that they all follow it, etc. But I think those are the kind of openness and search we've got to undertake. What the world, the policies, governments, all that we know, these are always full of newspapers. Always the news are always full of those things. That's all right. We've got to take that into account. But new movements are needed. Now, if historically one takes an example, I don't know to what extent in Australia, I know it was important in Latin America, the left movement, the Marxist influence. Now, I don't know enough about Australia to say anything about that. But one looks from the time of Marx onwards, Das Kapital, the Communist Manifesto, and other things. it had a very powerful influence worldwide for social justice, on this. And one has to, grant that revolutionary understanding and impulse that it brought about, and it spread worldwide on this, and it survives in many forms. Yes, it has been distorted, China, or it has collapsed, Soviet Union, that. But still, it is there. But it is not the full answer, see, because the violence part has not been abandoned in that. The ultimate motivation does not come from the spirit of human love here on this. And preparedness to suffer. Gandhi brought that in. Marx gave the idea of the justice, this social justice. Gandhi gave the idea of struggle for justice through non-violent means. That is, with the spirit of love, even for the enemy. Now, I don't have to tell you how old that message is. Okay, I think you have to get going. I'm afraid we could carry this on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you.
Kishore-gi, thank you so much. That was
Not at all. No, it's all right.
absolutely fascinating.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, we couldn't do more of the hospitality.
Oh,
It was a very
no,
short
but-
notice. Yes.
It's more than enough.
Would it be okay if we could have a photo, a group photo?
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, cool.
Would you like me to